Guarda questa serva patetica. Those words would destroy Carlo Dante's empire in less than 5 minutes. Teresa Warrants moved between the tables of Bellissimo with practiced grace, her simple black uniform crisp against the opulent gold and marble interior. The restaurant hummed with power, senators laughing over Barolo, CEOs sealing deals with handshakes, and at table 7, men whose fortunes were built on blood. Before we start, make sure to hit like and subscribe, and really, I'm curious. Where are you watching from? Drop your country name in the comments. I love seeing how far our stories travel. Carlo Dante sat like a king surveying his kingdom. The hand-tailored Armani suit, the Patek Philippe watch glinting under crystal chandeliers, the way other diners' eyes skittered away when they accidentally met his gaze. Beside him, Diane lounged in red silk, diamonds refracting light across the white tablecloth like tiny warnings. Teresa approached with her notepad. Carlo glanced up, his dark eyes sliding over her the way they'd slid over her dozens of times before, barely registering her existence. She was scenery, background noise, nothing. His lips curved into a smirk as he leaned toward Diane. Then he spoke in rapid Italian. Guarda questa serva patetica. Probabilmente non esse nemmeno leggere il menu. Portami il vino più costoso, stupida contadina. Diane's laughter rang out like breaking glass, her manicured hand flying to her mouth. Around them, 3 men in expensive suits, Carlo's inner circle, chuckled into their napkins, their eyes dancing with cruel amusement. Carlo warmed to his performance, gesturing dismissively at Teresa. Scammetto che non ho mai visto tanti soldi in vita sua. Guarda come si fissa con quegli occhi di cane bastonado. More laughter. One of the associates, a man with slicked back hair and a scar through his eyebrow, pulled out his phone, recording Teresa's presumed humiliation for later entertainment. Teresa set down the water glasses. Her hands didn't shake. Her expression remained neutral. She'd rehearsed this moment in every possible variation for 2 years. Carlo leaned back, fingers drumming on the armrest of his chair. He expected stammering, confusion, maybe tears from the ignorant little waitress who couldn't possibly understand what he was saying. Instead, Teresa locked eyes with him. In flawless Sicilian dialect, the language of Carlo's Palermo childhood, the tongue of his grandmother, the words of his private world, she replied, Il vino più costoso, signor Dante? O preferis quello che ha ordinato la notte in cui ha fatto sparire Michael Toretti nel porto di Brooklyn? Have you ever watched a man's entire world collapse in real time? The effect was surgical. Carlo's smirk didn't fade. It shattered. The tan drained from his face, leaving him the color of spoiled milk. His wine glass trembled in his hand, burgundy liquid sloshing dangerously close to the rim. Diane's laughter died mid-note. Her champagne flute slipped from her fingers, exploding against the marble floor in a spray of crystal shards and Veuve Clicquot. The entire restaurant froze. Conversations cut off mid-sentence. A fork clattered against china somewhere in the silence. Every eye in Bellissimo turned toward table 7. The 3 associates stopped laughing. Scarface slowly lowered his phone, his expression shifting from amusement to confusion to dawning horror. Cosa hai detto? Carlo's voice came out strangled. Teresa smiled, not warmly. Mi ha sentito perfettamente, Signor Dante. E ho sentito ogni singola parola che ha detto negli ultimi 2 anni. She let that land. Watched understanding bloom across his face like blood spreading through water. Saw the moment he realized the invisible woman had been watching him all along. Carlo's chair scraped violently backward as he stood, his face contorting with rage. Ci sei, he hissed. Teresa tucked her notepad calmly into her apron pocket. I'll give you a moment to decide on that wine, Mr. Dante. She turned, her voice dropping to barely a whisper. Though I'd recommend making it a quick decision. You won't have many more opportunities. She walked toward the kitchen, leaving Carlo frozen at table 7 like a man watching his own execution approach. Behind her, urgent whispers erupted in Italian. Carlo, c'è quella donna? Come fai a sapere di Toretti? Caso siamo fatuti. Teresa pushed through the kitchen doors, her hand brushing the small decorative pin on her apron. A pin that had captured every word Carlo had ever spoken in this restaurant. Every confession. Every order. Every casual mention of murder and money laundering. 3 blocks away, in an unmarked surveillance van parked on West 47th Street, FBI Special Agent Rodriguez pressed his finger to his earpiece. The recording was perfect. Crystal clear. Inadmissible. Not when the subject had been speaking freely in a public place, believing himself safely hidden behind a foreign language. Rodriguez reached for his radio, his face breaking into a grin. All units. This is Rodriguez. Subject has been notified. We are green for extraction. Repeat. We are green. Move in. Inside Bellissimo, Carlo Dante stood motionless at table 7, his empire beginning its spectacular collapse. He had no idea that the quiet waitress he'd tormented for 2 years, the one he'd called a stupid peasant, a pathetic servant, a woman too ignorant to even read a menu, was Special Agent Teresa Warren of the FBI's Organized Crime Division. And tonight, she'd just handed him his death sentence. But Teresa Warren's journey to this moment, standing in a restaurant kitchen while a mafia boss's world collapsed in the dining room behind her, had begun 730 days earlier in a windowless conference room at the FBI field office in Lower Manhattan. The day Deputy Director Catherine Walsh had asked her a simple question: how invisible can you become? The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows across the thick manila folder between them. Teresa sat across from Walsh, studying the name printed on the tab. Dante, Carlo Vincent. He's untouchable, Walsh said flatly, her fingers steepled beneath her chin. 15 years we've been trying to build a case. Witnesses disappear. Evidence vanishes. Judges retire suddenly with mysteriously padded bank accounts. He's corrupted half the justice system in New York. Teresa opened the folder. The first photograph showed a man in his early 40s, handsome in a dangerous way, dark eyes that held no warmth. Beside it, a list of suspected crimes that ran for 3 pages. Money laundering, racketeering, murder. The body count climbed with each page she turned. Michael Toretti, informant, disappeared October 2022. Marco Bellini, accountant who developed a conscience, found in the East River with concrete blocks tied to his ankles. Rosa Martinez, a bartender who witnessed the wrong conversation, never seen again after her shift ended. The list went on and on. What's the angle? Teresa asked, her voice steady despite the horror documented in front of her. Walsh slid another folder across the polished conference table. He has a routine. Clockwork. Every Tuesday and Friday night, 7 p.m., he holds court at Bellissimo, an Italian restaurant in Midtown. Been doing it for 5 years. Table 7 always. He conducts business there, meets with associates, discusses operations. In public. Teresa raised an eyebrow. In Italian. Walsh's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. Rapid. Idiomatic Italian. Sometimes Sicilian dialect. He talks freely because everyone there is on his payroll. Manager, sommelier, half the waitstaff. The ones who aren't on the payroll don't speak the language. He feels safe. Teresa saw where this was going. You want me to get hired there. We want you to disappear there. Walsh leaned forward, her expression grave. Complete deep cover. No half measures. You'll need a new name, new identity, new life. Everything from the ground up. Teresa had worked undercover before. She'd posed as a drug buyer in the Bronx, as a money mule for a trafficking ring in Queens. But those operations had lasted weeks, maybe months. Walsh's tone suggested something far more extensive. How long? Teresa asked. As long as it takes. Walsh's gaze didn't waver. Could be 6 months. Could be 2 years. We need someone who can become invisible. Someone Carlo Dante will never see as a threat because he won't see you as anything at all. The weight of that statement settled over the room. Walsh opened the second folder, revealing a fabricated life. Teresa Warrants, age 28, orphan, high school diploma, 3 years experience at chain restaurants. No college degree. No family. No connections. No FBI credentials. Nothing that would raise flags in even the most thorough background check. You'll be alone, Walsh continued. No contact with anyone from your real life except emergency protocols. Your mother thinks you're being stationed at our satellite office in Brussels. Your friends think you took a position with Interpol. No one can know the truth. Teresa studied the fabricated resume, the fake references, the carefully constructed mediocrity. Teresa Warrants was designed to be forgettable, invisible. You speak Italian? Walsh asked, though she already knew the answer from Teresa's personnel file. Fluently. My grandmother was from Naples. I spent summers there as a kid. Sicilian. Teresa hesitated. Conversational. I'd need refresher training. You'll get it. Intensive immersion. 6 weeks with our language specialists. We need you perfect. Not just fluent but native level. The kind of Sicilian that could only come from growing up in Palermo. Walsh pulled out another photograph. This one showed Bellissimo's interior. Gold leaf ceilings, marble columns, tables draped in white linen. Old money, new money, blood money, all mixing together over Osso Bucco and Brunello. The manager's clean, Walsh said. Franco Bellini, no relation to Marco. He's been cooperative when we've asked questions. Doesn't know who Carlo really is, just that he's an important client who tips well and keeps the restaurant fully booked every time he visits. Franco will hire you if your references check out. And my mission. Listen. Record. Document. Build an airtight RICO case. Walsh's voice hardened. Carlo Dante believes he's above the law. He believes money and violence make him invincible. We're going to prove him wrong. But we need evidence that will hold up in federal court. We need his own words condemning him. Teresa closed both folders, her decision already made. She joined the FBI to bring down predators like Carlo Dante, men who believed power meant they could destroy lives without consequence. What's my cover for quitting my current assignment? You're being transferred to Brussels, effective immediately. Organized crime liaison position. Very prestigious. Walsh stood extending her hand. When you walk out of this building, Special Agent Teresa Warren goes on leave. When you walk into Bellissimo for your interview, you'll be Teresa Warrants, broke, desperate for work, and completely harmless. Teresa shook her hand, feeling the weight of what she was agreeing to. 2 years, maybe more, of erasing herself, of becoming nothing so she could bring down a monster. One more thing, Walsh said as Teresa reached for the door. Carlo Dante is cruel, Agent Warren, particularly to people he sees as beneath him. He won't just ignore you. He'll mock you, humiliate you, treat you like trash. You'll need to endure it. Smile through it. Because the moment he suspects you're anything more than an ignorant waitress, you're dead. Teresa nodded. She understood. She'd been undercover before, faced dangerous men, endured their contempt. How bad could it be? She would find out soon enough. The transformation took 6 weeks. Teresa moved out of her Manhattan apartment and into a cramped studio in Brooklyn. 4th floor walk-up, radiator that clanked through the night, water pressure that barely qualified as a trickle. Teresa Warrants couldn't afford anything better. She spent her days at the FBI's training facility in Quantico, working with linguistic specialists who'd been recruited from Palermo itself. They drilled her relentlessly, not just vocabulary and grammar, but idioms, slang, the rhythmic cadence of Sicilian speech, the subtle differences between northern and southern dialects, the old expressions her fictional grandmother would have used. Again, Professor Castellano would bark. With feeling. You're not reciting, you're speaking. This is the language of your blood. By week 4, Teresa dreamed in Italian. By week 6, she could pass for a native speaker from the old neighborhoods of Palermo. She also learned to become invisible. They brought in behavioral psychologists who taught her how to shrink herself, how to avoid eye contact, how to move through a room without drawing attention, how to smile blandly while absorbing every detail. They studied her posture, her gait, the way she held her shoulders. You're too confident, Dr. Reeves told her during one session. Teresa Warrants has been beaten down by life. She doesn't walk like an FBI agent. She walks like someone who's afraid of taking up space. It was harder than learning a language. Teresa had spent her entire career projecting authority, commanding respect. Now she had to erase all of that, become small, forgettable, beneath notice. They practiced her cover story until it was seamless. The orphanage in Newark where she'd grown up. The string of restaurant jobs. Applebee's, Olive Garden, a brief stint at a diner that closed after a health inspection. The struggle to make rent. The quiet desperation of a woman with no safety net and no prospects. By the time she walked into Bellissimo for her interview, Teresa Warren had vanished completely. Franco Bellini was a short, round man with kind eyes and permanent tomato sauce stains on his apron. He looked over Teresa's fabricated resume while she sat nervously in the small office behind the kitchen. "You have restaurant experience," he said in accented English. "That's good. We need someone who can handle the pace." "I'm a hard worker, sir." Teresa's voice was soft, deferential. "I just need a chance." Franco studied her for a long moment. Later, Teresa would wonder what he saw. A woman in a discount blazer, worn shoes, tired eyes that spoke of too many late shifts and not enough sleep. Someone grateful for any opportunity. "Can you start Tuesday?" he asked. Teresa's heart hammered, but she kept her expression calm. "Yes, sir. Thank you. Thank you so much. The clientele here is—" Franco paused, searching for words. "Demanding. We serve very important people. Politicians. Business executives. They expect perfection. I understand. Some are." Another pause. "Difficult. Rude even. You cannot take it personally. You smile, you serve, you say nothing. Understand." Teresa nodded, wondering if Franco knew exactly who Carlo Dante was. If he understood what he was asking her to endure. "Tuesday, 5 p.m. Don't be late." She wasn't. Her first shift at Bellissimo was a blur of silver trays and shouted orders in Italian from the kitchen. The other servers were professionals, moving with choreographed precision through the dining room, delivering courses with theatrical flair. Teresa stayed in the back, running water glasses and bread baskets, learning the rhythm of service. She didn't see Carlo that first week. Tuesday came and went. Table 7 remained empty. "Mr. Dante is traveling," Franco explained when she asked about the reserved table. "He returns next week. When he arrives, you do not speak unless spoken to. You serve his table quickly and quietly. Capisce?" "Capisce," Teresa echoed. The following Friday, she was refilling water glasses near the kitchen when Franco grabbed her arm. "Table 7. Mr. Dante has arrived. Bring water and bread immediately." This was it. Teresa filled crystal glasses from the pitcher, arranged them on her tray with the bread basket, and walked toward table 7. Her heart pounded, but her hands were steady. 2 years of training had prepared her for this moment. Carlo Dante sat with 2 men in expensive suits, laughing at something one of them had said. He looked exactly like his photographs. Dark eyes, predatory smile, the confidence of a man who'd never been told no. Teresa approached. "Your water, signore." Carlo didn't even glance at her. She was furniture. She set down the glasses, placed the breadbasket in the center of the table, and started to retreat. "Vino," Carlo said without looking up. "Bring me your wine list." "Yes, sir." Teresa hurried to the bar, retrieved the leather-bound wine menu, and brought it back. Carlo took it without acknowledgement. His eyes stayed on his companions, his conversation continuing in rapid Italian about shipping schedules and payment transfers. Teresa caught every word, but she kept her expression blank as she backed away. At the service station, she made her first report. The bathroom stall had been equipped with a dead drop, a loose tile behind the toilet where she could leave written notes for the FBI cleanup team that came through every Sunday. She scribbled quickly. "First contact. Target discussing shipments. More intel needed." Over the next 2 months, Teresa became part of Bellissimo's furniture. She served Carlo's table every Tuesday and Friday. He never looked at her directly, never asked her name. She was simply you or waitress, or sometimes he'd just snap his fingers when he needed something. And he talked. Constantly. In Italian, always in Italian, his voice confident and casual as he discussed drug shipments, money transfers, problems that needed solving. His associates spoke freely too, never suspecting that the quiet woman refilling their water glasses understood every word. "Il carico arriva giovedì al porto. Dia simila pillole. Il solido prezzo." Shipment arriving Thursday at the docks. 10,000 pills. Standard price. Teresa wrote it down that night. The FBI intercepted the shipment. But it wasn't enough. They needed evidence that tied Carlo directly to the operation. They needed his voice on tape. That's when Walsh provided the microphone. It came disguised as a decorative pin, a small brooch that looked like cheap costume jewelry. Teresa wore it on her apron, and it captured everything within a 15-foot radius. Now when Carlo talked about eliminating witnesses, bribing judges, ordering executions, all of it was recorded, transmitted in real time to the FBI surveillance van parked 3 blocks away. They were building a case. Slowly, methodically, piece by piece. But Carlo's cruelty was building too. 6 months into her assignment, Teresa learned what Walsh had meant when she warned her about Carlo's nature. It started small. Carlo switching to Italian to make jokes about her appearance to his companions, calling her stupid, making crude comments about her body. His associates laughing while she stood there holding their dirty plates, her face neutral, her hands steady. "Guarda questa stupida. Probabilmente non ha mai finito le elementari." Look at this idiot. She probably didn't finish elementary school. Teresa wrote it down, added it to the evidence file, kept serving. The insults escalated. Carlo started making a game of it, seeing how far he could push, how cruel he could be. Sometimes he'd tip extra, making a show of leaving $50 on a $100 check. Per la povera serva. Forse può comprarsi del scarpe migliori. For the poor servant. Maybe she can buy herself better shoes. His associates roared with laughter. Teresa smiled politely and thanked him. 8 months in, she wanted to quit. She sat in her Brooklyn apartment at 2 a.m., staring at her reflection in the bathroom mirror. Who was she anymore? Teresa Warren felt like a memory. Teresa Warren's felt like a prison. She called the emergency number. Walsh answered on the second ring. "I need to come in," Teresa whispered. "I can't. I need a break." Silence. Then, "Agent Warren, I understand this is difficult. But we're close. The evidence we're gathering, it's unprecedented. We can bring down his entire operation. We just need more time." "He called me an animal yesterday," Teresa said. Her voice cracked. "Treated me like garbage while discussing how he murdered someone's daughter. I stood there smiling while he laughed about dumping her body in the river." "I know." Walsh's voice was gentle. "I know what you're enduring. But that girl's family deserves justice. All of his victims deserve justice. And you're the only one who can give it to them." Teresa closed her eyes. Walsh was right. She knew Walsh was right. How much longer? "We need the Toretti case nailed down. Once we have concrete evidence on the murder, we can move. 6 more months. Maybe less. 6 more months of being nothing. Of being invisible. Of enduring Carlo Dante's cruelty while he confessed to crimes that would make a jury weep." "Okay," Teresa whispered. 6 more months. She hung up and looked at her reflection again. Teresa Warren was still in there somewhere. She had to be. Because when this was over, when Carlo Dante was in handcuffs and his empire was ashes, Teresa needed to remember who she really was. The woman who'd spent 2 years becoming invisible so justice could finally see everything. 2 years earlier. FBI Field Office. Lower Manhattan. The conference room smelled like stale coffee and desperation. Special Agent Teresa Warren sat across from Deputy Director Catherine Walsh, studying the thick file between them. The name on the tab. Carlo Dante. "He's untouchable," Walsh said flatly, sliding the folder closer. 15 years we've been trying to build a case. Witnesses disappear. Evidence vanishes. Judges retire suddenly with mysteriously padded retirement accounts. He's corrupted half the system. When do I start? The transformation took 6 weeks. Teresa moved out of her Chelsea apartment into a 4th-floor walk-up in Brooklyn. No elevator. Radiator that clanked through the night. Water pressure that barely qualified as a trickle. Teresa Warrens couldn't afford anything better on a waitress's salary. She spent 12 hours a day at Quantico with Professor Castellano, a linguistics expert recruited from Palermo. He was relentless. Again, with feeling. You're not reciting a textbook. You're speaking your grandmother's language. By week 3, Teresa dreamed in Italian. By week 5, she could pass for a woman who'd grown up in the old Palermo neighborhoods. But language was only part of the transformation. Dr. Reeves, a behavioral psychologist, taught her how to become invisible, how to shrink into herself, How to move through a room without drawing attention. You're too confident, Dr. Reeves said during one session. Teresa Warrants has been beaten down by life. She doesn't walk like an FBI agent. She walks like someone afraid of taking up too much space. It was harder than learning Sicilian. Teresa had spent her career commanding respect, projecting authority. Now she had to erase all of that. Become small. Forgettable. Beneath notice. They practiced her cover story until it became real. The orphanage in Newark. The string of restaurant jobs. The constant struggle to make rent. The quiet desperation of a woman with no safety net and no prospects. By the time she walked into Bellissimo for her job interview, Teresa Warren had vanished completely. Franco Bellini was a short man with kind eyes and permanent tomato sauce stains on his apron. He reviewed her resume while Teresa sat with her hands folded in her lap, eyes downcast. "You have restaurant experience," he said in accented English. "That's good. We need someone reliable." "I'm a very hard worker, sir. I just need a chance." Franco studied her. The discount blazer, the worn shoes, the tired eyes. Someone grateful for any opportunity. "Can you start Tuesday?" Teresa's heart hammered, but her face remained calm. "Yes, sir. Thank you so much." Her first shift was chaos. Orders shouted in Italian from the kitchen. Servers moving like choreographed dancers. Teresa stayed in the background, running water glasses and bread baskets, learning the rhythm. She didn't see Carlo that first week. Table 7 remained empty. "Mr. Dante is traveling," Franco explained when she asked. "He returns next Friday. When he arrives, you do not speak unless spoken to. Serve quickly and quietly. Capice? Capice?" The following Friday, Franco grabbed her arm as she refilled water glasses. "Table 7. Mr. Dante has arrived. Water and bread. Subito." This was it. Teresa arranged crystal glasses on her tray, added the bread basket, and walked toward table 7. Her heart pounded, but her hands were steady. Carlo Dante sat with two men in expensive suits, mid-conversation. He looked exactly like his surveillance photos, but photographs couldn't capture the aura of danger that surrounded him, the way other diners instinctively avoided looking in his direction. Teresa approached. "Your water, signore." Carlo didn't even glance at her. She was furniture. Background noise. Nothing. She set down the glasses, placed the bread basket, and started to retreat. "Vino," Carlo said without looking up. "Bring the wine list." "Yes, sir." She retrieved the leather-bound menu from the bar and brought it back. Carlo took it without acknowledgement, his conversation continuing in rapid Italian about shipping schedules and payment transfers. Teresa caught every word, but she kept her expression blank, her eyes empty as she backed away. That night, in her cramped Brooklyn apartment, she typed her first mission report. Day 1. Subject made contact. Discussed shipments and payments in Italian, believing himself unobserved. Subject showed no awareness of my presence or comprehension. She paused, then added, "Target doesn't see me. Perfect." 6 months into her assignment, Teresa had become a ghost. She served water, cleared plates, smiled politely, and listened. Always listening. Carlo came every Tuesday and Friday. Always table 7. Always with different associates, discussing business in Italian, assuming the hired help couldn't understand. Il carico arriva giovedì. Dia simile pillole. Il solido prezzo. The shipment arrives Thursday. 10,000 pills. Standard price. Teresa's hand didn't shake as she refilled his water glass. Her face remained blank. That night she'd report, drug shipment, Thursday, 10,000 pills. The FBI would intercept it at the port. Another piece of the puzzle. But the challenge wasn't gathering intelligence. It was enduring the humiliation. Carlo had a particular gift for cruelty. He'd mock her appearance, her presumed poverty, her peasant stupidity. All in Italian, laughing with his companions while she stood there holding their dirty plates. Guarda come sorride. Non ha idea che la stiamo insultando. Look how she smiles. She has no idea we're insulting her. But Teresa did know. She knew every word. And every insult became evidence, carefully documented in her nightly reports. Each cruel joke was another count against him. Each degrading comment was another nail in his coffin. On a Tuesday in November, Carlo arrived with a particularly smug expression. He was discussing something that made his associates lean in close, their voices dropping to conspiratorial whispers. Il problema di Brooklyn è risolto, Carlo said, swirling his Barolo. Finalmente. Quel topo non parlerà più con nessuno. The Brooklyn problem is solved. Finally. That rat won't be talking to anyone anymore. Teresa's stomach turned. Brooklyn. She knew exactly what that meant. Michael Toretti, the informant who'd disappeared 2 years ago. Carlo was confirming the murder. Casual as ordering dessert. Dove el hai messo? One associate asked. Where did you put him? Carlo smiled. I pesci del Porto mangiano bene. The harbor fish are eating well. Laughter erupted around the table. Teresa stood 3 feet away, holding an empty water pitcher, her face carefully neutral while her mind screamed. She wanted to grab that wine glass and smash it across his smug face. Wanted to tell him she understood every word, that she knew exactly what kind of monster he was. Instead, she smiled politely. More water, signore? Carlo waved her away without looking. Questa stupida. Semper nei piedi. This idiot. Always underfoot. Teresa retreated to the kitchen, her hands finally trembling as she set down the pitcher. 2 weeks later, everything changed. Carlo arrived on a Friday with someone new, a woman. She was stunning in a calculated way. Perfect hair, designer dress in blood red, diamonds at her throat that caught the light like warnings. Questa è Diane, Carlo announced to his associates. La mia fidanzata. This is Diane, my fiancée. The men offered congratulations. Diane accepted them with a smile that never reached her eyes. When Teresa approached to take drink orders, Diane's gaze swept over her with undisguised contempt. Dio Carlo, dove trovi quest servet? God Carlo, where do you find these waitresses? Sembra che non sia lavata de giorni. She looks like she hasn't washed in days. Carlo laughed. Franco assumed chiunque. Ma lei è brava. Esister al suo posto. Franco hires anyone. But she's good, she knows her place. Il suo posto dovrebbe essere in una cucina de qualche parte, non ca, Diane said, wrinkling her nose. Her place should be in some kitchen somewhere, not here. Teresa poured water with steady hands, her jaw tight. Diane's cruelty had a different quality than Carlo's. Sharper, more personal, designed to cut deeper. But as the evening progressed, Teresa noticed something crucial. When Carlo's associates discussed shipments and territories, Diane didn't tune out. She leaned in, asked pointed questions about percentages and timelines. At one point, she pulled out a tablet, showing Carlo spreadsheets with account numbers. I trasferimenti sono completi, Diane said. 4 milioni nelli Cayman. Il resto distribuito cum high chiesto. The transfers are complete. 4 million in the Caymans. The rest distributed as you requested. Teresa's pulse quickened. Diane wasn't just a trophy fiancée. She was the accountant, the money launderer. This changed everything. By month 8, the emotional toll was becoming unbearable. Carlo's paranoia had intensified. He'd started discussing a suspected informant in his organization. Someone feeding information to the feds. The irony was suffocating. C'è una talpa, he hissed one Tuesday, his knuckles white around his wine glass. There's a mole. Qualcuno sta parlando. Quando lo trovo finirà cum Toretti. Someone is talking. When I find them, they'll end up like Toretti. His associates exchanged nervous glances. One of them, a man named Sal, suggested checking everyone's phones, their computers, their families. Nessuno è al di sopra di ogni sospetto, Carlo said. No one is above suspicion. Teresa refilled his water, invisible and invincible all at once. The man hunting for an informant never once looked at the woman standing 18 inches from his elbow. That same night, opportunity struck. Carlo excused himself to use the restroom, leaving his briefcase at the table. His associates were distracted, arguing about the suspected informant. Teresa had maybe 40 seconds. She moved to clear their appetizer plates. As she leaned across the table, her hand brushed Carlo's briefcase. The clasp was unlocked, arrogant as everything else about him. She flipped it open while stacking plates. Inside, a ledger handwritten, with dates and amounts. Her phone was in her apron pocket. She angled it, snapped 3 quick photos under the cover of reaching for a fork. 20 seconds. 30. She closed the briefcase, gathered the plates, and turned toward the kitchen just as Carlo emerged from the restroom. His eyes swept the table, landed on his briefcase. For one terrible moment, Teresa thought he knew. Thought he'd somehow sensed the violation. Then he sat down and reached for his wine. Dove eravamo. Where were we? Teresa's legs almost gave out as she pushed through the kitchen doors. That night, Lying in her cramped apartment at 2 a.m., Teresa stared at the water-stained ceiling and felt something crack inside her. 10 months of being called stupid, worthless, a peasant. 10 months of smiling while Carlo discussed murder and torture like sports scores. She called the emergency number. Walsh answered on the second ring. "I need extraction," Teresa whispered. "Just for a few days. I need to remember who I am." Silence. Then, "Agent Warren, I understand this is difficult. He talked about Toretti tonight. Laughed about feeding him to the fish. And I stood there. I stood there and smiled and asked if he wanted more water." Her voice cracked. "I don't know how much longer I can do this." "The evidence you're gathering is unprecedented," Walsh said quietly. "We're building the strongest RICO case this office has ever seen. But we need more. We need the money trail locked down. We need witness testimony. We need more," Teresa finished bitterly. "You always need more. 6 more months. Maybe less. Then we move." Teresa closed her eyes. 6 more months of being nothing. Of swallowing her rage while Carlo Dante confessed to crimes that would make a jury weep. "The ledger photos you sent tonight," Walsh continued. "Financial Crimes says they're gold. Links to 12 shell corporations. With Diane's involvement, we can trace the entire money laundering operation. You're doing everything right, Warren. Everything right." It didn't feel right. It felt like drowning in slow motion. "What if I can't hold on that long?" "You can," Walsh said firmly. "Because Michael Toretti can't. Because Rosa Martinez can't. Because all of Carlo Dante's victims are counting on you to be strong enough to bring him down." Teresa stared at the ceiling for a long time after hanging up. Walsh was right. She knew Walsh was right. So she'd hold on. She'd endure 6 more months of being invisible. Of being insulted and dismissed and treated like garbage. Because when this was over, when Carlo Dante was in handcuffs and his empire was ashes, every moment of humiliation would be worth it. She just had to survive long enough to see it happen. Diane became a regular fixture at Bellissimo after that first introduction. Every Wednesday evening like clockwork, always impeccably dressed, always wearing that cold smile that never touched her eyes. And she treated Teresa worse than Carlo ever had. Dio Carlo, dove trovi quest servet? God, Carlo, where do you find these waitresses? Sembra che non sia lavata de giorni. She looks like she hasn't washed in days. Teresa would smile politely, refill the water glasses, and disappear. But unlike Carlo's casual cruelty, Diane's insults felt calculated, personal, as if she took particular pleasure in degrading the help. "Guarda lassù scarpe," Diane said one evening, gesturing at Teresa's worn flats with a manicured finger. "Look at her shoes. Probabilmente le ha prese da un negozio dell'usato. She probably got them from a thrift store." Carlo laughed, reaching for Diane's hand. "Sei cattiva, amore mio. You're wicked, my love. Sono solo onesta. I'm just honest." Teresa kept her face neutral as she cleared their appetizer plates. but her mind was cataloging every word, every insult. Every moment of casual cruelty would become evidence. But during one particularly busy Friday night, Teresa overheard something that changed everything. She was refilling water at the adjacent table when Diane pulled out her tablet, angling it so Carlo could see the screen. Her voice dropped to a near whisper, but Teresa's position, and the microphone in her apron pin, caught every word. Il trasferimento di Singapore è completato. 3 milioni distribuiti attraverso la solita società di Komodo. The Singapore transfer is complete. 3 million distributed through the usual shell corporations. I conti del Cayman sono stati ripulati. Nessuna traccia. The Cayman accounts have been cleaned. No trace. Carlo nodded approvingly. Il problema con Castellano? And the problem with Castellano? Risolto. Ho spostato I fondi attraverso il Bahamas. Anche se la SEC indaga, non troveranno nulla. Resolved. I moved the funds through the Bahamas. Even if the SEC investigates, they won't find anything. Teresa's pulse quickened. Diane wasn't just Carlo's beautiful accessory. She was discussing offshore accounts, wire transfers, money laundering with the expertise of a seasoned financial criminal. Diane was Carlo's accountant. That night, Teresa's report was urgent. Critical development. Diane Rossetti is not merely Carlo's fiancée. She is conducting complex money laundering operations. Discussed Singapore transfers, Cayman accounts, SEC evasion strategies. Recommend immediate parallel investigation into Rossetti's financial activities. The response from Walsh came within hours. Excellent work. Financial Crimes Unit is opening case file on Rossetti. Continue surveillance. We need documentation. Teresa began tracking Diane's patterns with the same meticulous attention she'd given Carlo. Every Wednesday, Diane arrived at Bellissimo at 6:15, 45 minutes before Carlo. She always carried a brown leather portfolio, always sat at the far end of the bar, always ordered a dry martini. And she always made phone calls. Teresa volunteered for bar shifts every Wednesday. At first, she simply observed from a distance. Diane with her phone pressed to her ear, speaking in rapid Italian about account numbers and transfer dates. Her free hand would occasionally open the portfolio, consulting documents inside. The second Wednesday, Teresa got closer. She was wiping down the bar 3 seats away when Diane's voice rose slightly with frustration. No, ho detto Giovidi. Il trasferimento deve essere completato entro Giovidi o la banca congelerà I fondi. No, I said Thursday. The transfer must be completed by Thursday or the bank will freeze the funds. A pause. Diane's perfectly manicured nails drummed against the bar. 3,2 milioni. Dal Cayman a Zurigo. Poi diviso tra le 4 società che ti ho indicato. 3.2 million. From the Caymans to Zurich, then split between the 4 companies I indicated. Teresa's microphone captured every word. That night, the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit had another piece of the puzzle. A $3.2 million transaction scheduled for Thursday. The third Wednesday, opportunity struck. Diane's phone rang just as Franco called Teresa to the kitchen for a staff meeting. Diane answered, standing and walking toward the restaurant's entrance for better reception. In her distraction, she left her leather portfolio on the bar. Teresa glanced toward the entrance. Diane had her back turned, phone pressed to her ear, arguing with someone in sharp Italian. 45 seconds. Maybe less. Teresa moved quickly. She flipped open the portfolio with practiced efficiency. Bank statements from the Caymans, transfer receipts stamped with dates and routing numbers, company registrations for businesses in the Bahamas, Panama, Singapore. Her phone was already in her hand. She held it over the documents, camera clicking silently. First page. Second page. Third. 20 seconds. A spreadsheet showing 12 different shell corporations, each with corresponding account numbers and balances. Millions of dollars, carefully distributed to avoid detection. 30 seconds. Notes in Diane's handwriting. Bellini, handled. Toretti, cleanup complete. Martinez, final payment processed. Teresa's blood ran cold. Those were the names of Carlo's victims. And Diane had been involved in their murders, handling the financial cleanup, processing payments to the killers. 40 seconds. Teresa's camera captured the last page just as Diane's voice grew louder near the entrance. She was wrapping up her call. Teresa closed the portfolio, grabbed Diane's empty martini glass, and turned toward the bar just as Diane approached. Their eyes met. Diane's gaze narrowed, flicking from Teresa's face to the portfolio to Teresa's hands holding the empty glass. "Your drink, signorina," Teresa said softly in Italian, her voice apologetic. "Voleva un altro? Would you like another?" It was a calculated risk. Teresa Warrants wasn't supposed to speak much Italian, but the moment required an explanation for standing so close to Diane's belongings. Diane's expression shifted from suspicion to contempt. "Tu parli italiano? You speak Italian. Un po', signorina. Solo quello che imparo qua. A little, miss. Only what I learn here." Diane's laugh was cold. "Quanto patetico. Una serva che cerca di impressionarmi con il suo italiano de scuola elementare." How pathetic. A servant trying to impress me with her elementary school Italian. She snatched the portfolio, checking its contents. Teresa's heart hammered, but she kept her expression meek, eyes downcast. Diane seemed satisfied nothing was disturbed. "Sì, portami un altro martini. E cerca di non essere così invidente la prossima volta." "Yes, bring me another martini. And try not to be so intrusive next time." "Mi scusi, signorina." "Forgive me, miss." Teresa retreated to the bar, her hands finally trembling as she prepared the drink. Behind Diane's back, she allowed herself one small exhale of relief. The photographs were perfect. 23 pages of documented financial crimes, captured in crystal clarity. Over the following weeks, Teresa pieced together the full scope of Diane's operation. She wasn't just moving Carlo's money, she was orchestrating the entire financial infrastructure of his criminal empire. Every murder, every drug shipment, Every bribe had a corresponding payment that Diane processed and concealed. During one Wednesday evening, Teresa overheard Diane on the phone discussing a problematic business partner in New Jersey. 2 days later, that man's death was ruled an accident, a gas leak in his home. Teresa found Diane's payment records for the hitman buried in the next week's portfolio photographs. $75,000 transferred through a shell corporation in Panama. The FBI's Financial Crimes Unit was building a case that ran parallel to the RICO charges. With every document Teresa captured, every phone call she recorded, the web of Diane's money laundering operation became clearer. She'd been involved in at least 3 murders, not as the triggerman, but as the financial architect. She'd paid for Bellini's execution, arranged the funds for Toretti's disposal, processed the final payment for Martinez's murder. And she'd done it all while sitting in expensive restaurants, wearing designer dresses, playing the role of Carlo's glamorous fiancée. One evening, Teresa was clearing plates when she heard Diane discussing a new operation with Carlo. Il problema è che abbiamo troppi soldi in movimento, Diane said, her voice clinical. The problem is we have too much money moving. La SEC sta prestando attenzione ai trasferimenti dal Cayman. Dobbiamo diversificare. Force Dubai o Singapore di nuovo. The SEC is paying attention to Cayman transfers. We need to diversify. Maybe Dubai or Singapore again. Carlo nodded thoughtfully. Quanto possiamo spostare senza attirare attenzione? How much can we move without attracting attention? 10 forse 15 milioni nel prossimo trimestre. Ma dobbiamo essere intelligenti. Più società, più giurisdizioni. 10, maybe 15 million next quarter. But we have to be smart. More companies, more jurisdictions. Teresa's microphone captured every word. That night, her report detailed the scope of what they'd uncovered. A money laundering operation spanning 5 continents, processing tens of millions of dollars annually, all coordinated by the woman Carlo introduced as his fiancée. Walsh's response came through the secure channel. Financial Crime says this is the most comprehensive money laundering case they've seen in a decade. Rossetti isn't just complicit. She's the architect. Continue surveillance. We need more connections between her and the murders. 1 month later, Teresa got exactly that. She was refilling water when Diane received a phone call that clearly upset her. Diane's face tightened, her voice dropping to an urgent whisper. Cosa vuoi dire che il testimone sta parlando? What do you mean the witness is talking? Gli abbiamo pagato $500,000 per il suo silenzio. We paid him $500,000 for his silence. A pause. Diane's knuckles whitened around her phone. Allora gesticolo. Lo stesso modo di Toretti. E questa volta assicurati che il corpo non venga mai trovato. Then handle it. Same way as Toretti. And this time make sure the body is never found. She hung up, her composure cracking for just a moment before the cold mask slipped back into place. Teresa's hand didn't shake as she refilled Diane's water glass. But internally, she was reeling. Diane hadn't just processed payments after the fact. She was actively ordering executions. That night, Teresa's report was definitive. Diane Rossetti is not merely the girlfriend. She is not merely the accountant. She is the CFO of a criminal empire. And she is directly ordering murders. Recording from tonight documents her ordering a witness execution, the same way as Toretti. Recommend immediate arrest warrant preparation for Rossetti alongside Carlo Dante. She is equally culpable and equally dangerous. The response from Walsh was immediate. Excellent work, Agent Warren. We have enough on Rossetti for RICO conspiracy and murder for hire charges. Continue surveillance on both subjects. We're preparing for simultaneous arrests. The end is near. The end is near. Teresa lay in her cramped apartment that night, staring at the ceiling, and allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. 14 months of being invisible. 14 months of enduring abuse and humiliation from two monsters who believed themselves untouchable. But she'd seen everything, recorded everything, documented their empire brick by brick. Soon, very soon, she'd watch it all come crashing down. Michael Toretti haunted Teresa's investigation like a ghost demanding justice. His name appeared repeatedly in intercepted conversations, always in hushed tones, always with that careful language criminals use when discussing their worst crimes. Carlo's voice on recordings, captured by Teresa's microphone. Il problema di Brooklyn è risolto. The Brooklyn problem is solved. Teresa spent weeks tracking that single reference. She'd requested Toretti's file from the NYPD. What little existed. Michael Toretti, age 34, low-level associate in the Dante organization who'd started feeding information to the police. Names, dates, shipment schedules. He'd been building a case from the inside. Then he vanished. October 15, 2022. Left his apartment in Bensonhurst one evening. Never came home. No body. No witnesses. No leads. Until one night at Table 7, when one of Carlo's associates, a man named Polly with nervous hands, asked the question that changed everything. Cosa hai fatto del corpo? What did you do with the body? Carlo had smiled, swirling his Barolo, the candlelight catching the wine like blood. I pesci del porto di Brooklyn mangiano bene. The Brooklyn harbor fish eat well. Laughter erupted around the table. Teresa stood 3 feet away, holding an empty water pitcher, her stomach churning. She wanted to vomit, wanted to scream, wanted to grab that wine bottle and smash it across Carlo's smiling face. Instead, she kept pouring water, her hand steady, her expression blank. That night, lying in her apartment, she made a decision. The FBI had Toretti's case marked as cold. No body meant no murder charge that would stick. But Carlo had just confirmed it. Confirmed the location, confirmed his involvement. Teresa called the emergency line. Walsh answered immediately. I need to investigate the Brooklyn docks, Teresa said without preamble. Toretti's body is there. I know it is. Agent Warren, that's outside your operational parameters. Carlo is bragging about it, Teresa cut in, her voice tight. He's discussing it openly because he thinks no one can touch him. If we can find evidence, Any evidence, we can close this murder. We can put him away for life. Silence on the line. Then, you'd be working alone. Off the books. If your cover is compromised. My cover is solid. I've been invisible for 14 months. Let me be invisible for this too. Another pause. 72 hours. If you find nothing, you come back to your assignment. And Warren, be careful. If Dante's people catch you snooping around their dumping ground. She didn't need Walsh to finish that sentence. Teresa spent the next 3 weeks haunting the Brooklyn waterfront during her nights off from Bellissimo. She dressed in civilian clothes. Jeans, a dark hoodie, worn sneakers. She looked like any other person down on their luck, which made her invisible in a different way. The docks at night were populated by the forgotten. Homeless men sleeping under piers, dock workers finishing late shifts, teenagers looking for trouble. She talked to everyone. Offered cigarettes she didn't smoke, bought coffee for workers coming off shift, slipped $20 bills to men who spent their nights watching the harbor. You ever see anything strange around here? She'd ask casually. Couple years back, maybe October 2022. Most people shook their heads, took her money, moved on. But on her 5th night, a dock worker named Martinez, no relation to Rosa, gave her something useful. October 2022. He'd frowned, accepting the coffee she'd bought him. Yeah, I remember that month. Couple of guys, real unfriendly types, came through Pier 7 real late one night. 3, maybe 4 in the morning. Had a truck. Moved something heavy into the old Castellano warehouse. Castellano. Teresa's pulse quickened. Yeah, been abandoned for years. Owner died. Estate's been tied up in court. Nobody uses it anymore. He'd looked at her curiously. Why you asking? My cousin went missing around then, Teresa lied smoothly. Just trying to find answers. Martinez had given her directions to the warehouse. Then he'd added quietly, "Those guys I saw? They had guns. Visible, like they didn't care who knew. You be careful." Teresa spent another week studying shipping manifests at the Public Records Office, tracing ownership of the Castellano warehouse. The trail led through 3 different shell corporations before she found it. A company registered in the Bahamas with an account number she recognized from Diane's portfolio photographs. Diane owned the warehouse. Or rather, one of her shell companies did. This was it. This was where they'd taken Toretti. Teresa waited until a moonless Tuesday night, Carlo's regular night at Bellissimo, which meant his enforcers would likely be there providing security. She drove to Pier 7, parked 3 blocks away, and approached the warehouse on foot. The building loomed against the night sky, rusted metal siding, broken windows, a padlock on the main door that looked newer than the structure itself. Teresa pulled out her lock-pick set, another skill from Quantico, and had it open in 40 seconds. The interior was cavernous and dark. Her flashlight beam cut through the blackness, illuminating stacks of empty shipping containers, rusted machinery, decades of industrial decay. And in the far corner, near a floor drain, something that made her blood run cold. Stains on the concrete. Dark, irregular, faded but still visible. Blood. Old blood. Teresa pulled out her evidence kit. Technically FBI property she'd borrowed without authorization, and took samples. Her camera documented everything. The stains, the drain, the scratches on the concrete where something heavy had been dragged. She was so focused on collecting evidence that she almost missed the sound. Footsteps. Outside. Multiple sets. Voices in Italian growing louder. Controllo di routine. Il capo vuol assicurarsi che nessuno faccia il naso. Routine check. The boss wants to make sure no one's snooping around. Teresa's heart stopped. Dante's enforcers. Doing their rounds. She killed her flashlight instantly, plunging herself into darkness. The footsteps were approaching the main door. She could hear keys jingling, the padlock being manipulated. Teresa ran. Not toward the exit, that was suicide, but deeper into the warehouse. She squeezed behind a shipping container just as the door swung open and flashlight beams swept through the space. 2 men. Both armed. She could see the guns on their hips as they entered. Tutto sembra a posto, one said. Everything looks fine. Controlla l'angolo. L'ultima volta si erano dei senzatetto che dentro. Check the corner. Last time there were homeless people in here. They were walking toward her hiding spot. Toward the corner where she'd just been collecting evidence. Teresa pressed herself against the cold metal, her hand moving slowly to her ankle holster. She carried a backup weapon, against protocol for undercover work, but she'd learned to trust her instincts. If they found her, if they recognized her from Bellissimo. Teresa sat in her Brooklyn apartment, reading the message, and finally allowed herself to feel something other than fear and rage. She'd done it. After 2 years of being invisible, after enduring countless humiliations and threats, she'd found the evidence that would put Carlo Dante away for life. Michael Toretti's ghost could finally rest. And Teresa could finally, stop being invisible and show Carlo Dante exactly who she really was. The moment Teresa spoke Sicilian at table 7, everything changed. Carlo stared at her like she'd transformed into something impossible. Like the furniture had suddenly grown teeth. The color drained from his face, tan skin turning the shade of old paper. His wine glass trembled in his hand, burgundy liquid threatening to spill. Diane's champagne glass lay shattered at her feet, crystal fragments scattered across marble like diamonds, expensive Veuve Clicquot pooling around her designer heels. The entire restaurant had gone silent. Every conversation stopped mid-sentence. Forks frozen halfway to mouths. The sommelier stood motionless near the bar, wine bottle suspended in air. Carlo's 3 associates, Sal, Polly, and the one with the scar, looked between Carlo and Teresa, their expressions shifting from confusion to alarm. Hands moved instinctively toward concealed weapons under expensive suit jackets. Chise. Carlo's voice came out barely above a whisper, strangled and raw. Teresa smiled. Not the polite, subservient smile of Teresa Warrant's The Waitress. This was something colder, sharper. The smile of someone who'd been waiting 2 years for this exact moment. Sono la donna che ti ascolta da 2 anni, Carlo. I'm the woman who's been listening to you for 2 years. So tutto. I molli. Lo spedizione. I giudici che hai comprato. E I conti di Diane alle Cayman. I know everything. The docks. The shipments. The judges you bought. And Diane's Cayman accounts. Carlo's chair scraped violently backward as he stood, his face contorting from shock into pure rage. The transformation was instantaneous. The smooth, confident crime boss replaced by something feral and dangerous. He lunged across the table, his hand shooting out to grab Teresa's wrist. His grip was crushing, fingers digging into her flesh hard enough to bruise. Who are you? The words came out in English now, each one bitten off with barely controlled fury. Teresa didn't flinch, didn't pull away. Instead, she leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a whisper that only Carlo could hear. Sono la donna che ti mandera in prigione per il resto della tua vita. Ogni insulto, ogni minaccia, ogni confession che hai fatto credendo fossi troppo stupida per capire. Liho registrati tutti. I'm the woman who will send you to prison for the rest of your life. Every insult, every threat, every confession you made believing I was too stupid to understand. I recorded them all. Understanding bloomed across Carlo's face like blood in water. His eyes widened. His grip loosened fractionally. Teresa twisted her wrist free with a practiced defensive move, the kind taught at Quantico, the kind that spoke of training Carlo definitely hadn't expected from a waitress. She stepped back, smoothing her apron. Smiled again. Enjoy your wine, Signor Dante. Her voice was calm, almost pleasant. It's the last expensive thing you'll ever taste. Carlo roared, an inhuman sound of rage and betrayal. He reached for her again, lunging around the table. The restaurant doors exploded inward. FBI. Nobody move. Agents in tactical gear flooded through every entrance. Front doors, kitchen entrance, emergency exits. 20 agents, maybe more, weapons drawn, movements choreographed with military precision. Chaos erupted. Patrons screamed. A woman in pearls dove under her table. A Senator Teresa recognized from television raised his hands, wine glass still clutched in his fingers. Waiters scattered, trays clattering to the floor. Carlo spun toward the entrance, his face cycling through emotions too fast to track. Rage, fear, calculation, desperation. Sal reached for his gun. Gun! An agent shouted. 3 shots rang out. Precise, controlled. Sal went down with a bullet in his shoulder, his weapon skittering across the marble floor. He screamed, clutching his shoulder, blood seeping between his fingers. Paulie raised his hands immediately, backing against the wall. The scarred associate tried to run for the kitchen. 2 agents tackled him before he made it 3 steps, slamming him face first into the floor. Diane stood frozen in her red dress, champagne-soaked feet surrounded by crystal shards, her face a mask of perfect horror. Then she ran. She kicked off her heels and sprinted for the back hallway, designer dress hiked up, moving faster than seemed possible. Runner. Rodriguez's voice cut through the chaos. 2 female agents intercepted Diane before she reached the back exit. She fought, clawing, scratching, screaming obscenities in Italian. They took her down hard, face pressed against the wall, handcuffs clicking around her wrists while she shrieked. Carlo stood at table 7, paralyzed, watching his empire collapse in real time. 4 agents converged on him, weapons trained. Carlo Dante, you're under arrest for racketeering, conspiracy to commit murder, money laundering, and violating the RICO statute. No. Carlo shook his head, backing away. No, you can't. They didn't give him time to finish. 2 agents grabbed his arms, spinning him around, slamming him face first onto table 7. His expensive suit crushed against the white tablecloth, knocking over wine glasses. The Barolo he'd been drinking moments ago spilled across the table, soaking into the fabric like blood. Metal handcuffs clicked around his wrists. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Teresa stood 6 feet away, watching. She reached up slowly, deliberately, and untied her apron. Let it fall to the floor. Beneath it, clipped to her belt, was her FBI badge. Special Agent Teresa Warren. Shield number 2847. Carlo's head turned, his cheek pressed against the table, his eyes finding hers. The recognition that flooded his face was almost worth 2 years of humiliation. You. His voice was hoarse. 2 years. You were nobody. How? Teresa walked closer, crouching slightly so they were eye level. Her voice was quiet, meant only for him. That was the point, Carlo. You never saw me at all. She straightened, nodding to the agents. Get him out of here. They hauled Carlo to his feet, his expensive suit wrinkled and wine-stained, his hands cuffed behind his back. He stumbled, disoriented, as they pushed him toward the exit. But he kept staring at Teresa, his mind clearly racing through 2 years of conversations. 2 years of freely discussing murders, shipments, bribes. 2 years of mocking the waitress who served his water. The waitress who'd understood every word. Near the bar, Diane was being read her rights, her perfect hair disheveled, mascara running down her face. She caught sight of Teresa and screamed, Troia! Say una Troia! Bitch! You're a bitch! Teresa didn't even glance at her. Sal was being loaded onto a stretcher, his shoulder bandaged, his face gray with shock and pain. Polly and Scarface were already cuffed, being led out in a line. Franco stood near the kitchen, his face ashen, hands trembling. I didn't know, he kept saying to anyone who would listen. I swear to God, I didn't know who he was. Rodriguez appeared at Teresa's side, grinning. Hell of a performance, Warren. Just doing my job. But Teresa's hands were shaking now, adrenaline finally catching up with her. 2 years undercover. I don't know how you did it. One insult at a time. Teresa watched as Carlo was pushed through the restaurant doors, camera flashes exploding as media, somehow already on scene, captured every moment. Carlo Dante, the untouchable crime boss, being perp-walked out of his favorite restaurant in handcuffs. The last thing Teresa saw before they loaded him into the FBI van was his face in the window, still staring back at the restaurant. still staring at her, still trying to understand how the invisible woman had destroyed him. Rodriguez touched her arm gently. "Come on. We need your statement. Then you can go home. The real home, I mean. Your apartment in Chelsea. Not that Brooklyn walk-up." Teresa nodded, but she didn't move immediately. She stood in the center of Bellissimo, surrounded by overturned tables and spilled wine and frightened patrons giving statements to agents. For 2 years, she'd been invisible in this room. For 2 years, she'd served water and cleared plates and swallowed her rage while monsters laughed at her expense. But tonight, finally, everyone could see her. Special Agent Teresa Warren. The woman who'd brought down the Dante crime family. She picked up her apron from where it had fallen, fingering the small pin, the microphone that had captured everything. 2 years of evidence. 2 years of confessions. 2 years of Carlo Dante hanging himself with his own words. And he'd never seen it coming. Because he'd never bothered to look. FBI Field Office, Lower Manhattan. 3 days after the arrest. The conference room table was buried under evidence. Stacks of files, bankers' boxes filled with financial records, USB drives containing hundreds of hours of audio recordings, photographs spread across every available surface like a macabre mosaic of crime. Deputy Director Walsh stood at the head of the table, surveying the hall with something approaching awe. 2 years of recordings, she said, gesturing to the digital archives displayed on the wall monitor. Photographed documents. Financial records spanning 5 continents. Witness statements from dock workers. DNA evidence from the warehouse. And testimony from 3 Dante associates who flipped the moment they were in handcuffs. She turned to face the room. Prosecutors from the U.S. Attorney's Office, agents from financial crimes, the entire task force that had supported Teresa's operation from the shadows. This is the biggest RICO case this office has ever built. 47 counts against Carlo Dante alone. 32 against Diane Rossetti. Warrants out for 18 associates across 3 states. The prosecutors were smiling. One of them, a sharp woman named Margaret Chen, was already organizing files for trial preparation. "The case is airtight," Chen said. "We have his own voice confessing to 12 murders. We have financial records linking him to money laundering, drug trafficking, and bribery. We have witness testimony corroborating every charge." Teresa sat across from Walsh, no longer in a waitress uniform. She wore a crisp FBI suit, navy blue, perfectly tailored, her badge displayed proudly on her belt. Her hair was down, styled professionally. She looked like Special Agent Teresa Warren again. But she didn't feel like her. "Agent Warren's testimony will be compelling," another prosecutor added. A federal agent who spent 2 years undercover, enduring systematic abuse while gathering evidence. Juries love that narrative. Teresa's hands were folded on the table in front of her, but beneath the surface, she was trembling. She'd spent the last 72 hours in debriefing sessions, recounting every interaction with Carlo, every insult Diane had thrown at her, every piece of evidence she'd collected. The sessions lasted 8, 10, 12 hours. Her throat was raw from talking. The evidence was overwhelming, incontrovertible. They had Carlo Dante on tape discussing murders like ordering pizza. They had Diane's financial records showing millions of dollars laundered through offshore accounts. They had everything. But sitting in this conference room, surrounded by the wreckage of 2 years of her life, Teresa felt hollow. Agent Warren. Teresa looked up. Walsh was watching her with concern. You should go home. Get some rest. We have what we need for now. Home. Teresa almost laughed. Which home? The cramped Brooklyn walk-up she'd lived in as Teresa Warrant's? The Chelsea apartment she hadn't seen in 2 years? I'm fine, Teresa said automatically. Walsh's expression said she didn't believe that for a second. You have a mandatory appointment with Dr. Reeves tomorrow morning. 10 a.m. non-negotiable. The FBI psychologist. Of course. Dr. Reeves's office was nothing like the sterile conference rooms Teresa had been living in. Comfortable chairs, soft lighting, a window overlooking the city. How are you feeling, Teresa? Dr. Reeves asked, notepad ready but not intrusive. Fine. The lie came easily. Too easily. You spent 2 years being systematically degraded by dangerous criminals. You were called stupid, worthless, a peasant. You endured constant humiliation while maintaining perfect cover. That's not something you just walk away from. Teresa stared at her hands. I did my job. You did your job extraordinarily well. But that doesn't mean it didn't cost you something. The silence stretched. Teresa didn't know how to explain it. The disorientation of looking in the mirror and not recognizing herself. The way she still flinched when people made eye contact. The instinct to make herself smaller, quieter, invisible. She'd been Teresa Warren's for so long that Teresa Warren felt like a costume she couldn't quite fit into anymore. I keep hearing his voice, Teresa admitted finally. Carlo. Calling me stupid. Laughing at me. And I know it was fake, know I was playing a role, but the abuse was real, Dr. Reeves said gently. Even if he didn't know your real identity, the things he said, the way he treated you, that was real. And it had a real impact. Teresa's throat tightened. I should be celebrating. We got him. We dismantled his entire organization. Why do I feel like this? Because you're human. Because 2 years of trauma doesn't disappear the moment you put the handcuffs on. Recovery takes time. Reconnecting with her real life was harder than Teresa had anticipated. Her mother had believed she was on assignment in Brussels, a prestigious position with Interpol. When Teresa finally called to explain the truth, her mother had cried for 20 minutes. 2 years, her mother kept saying. 2 years you were in danger and I didn't even know. I couldn't tell you, Mom. It would have compromised the operation. I know. But my baby was. Her voice broke. I'm so proud of you. And so angry at you. And so relieved you're safe. Teresa's younger sister, Maya, had a different reaction. You spent 2 years as a waitress bringing down the mafia? That's the most badass thing I've ever heard. But even their support couldn't fill the hollowness Teresa felt. The media frenzy was immediate and overwhelming. FBI agent spent 2 years as waitress to bring down Mafia Boss, screamed the headlines. Every news outlet wanted an interview. Teresa's photo was everywhere. Side-by-side comparisons of her in the waitress uniform versus her FBI suit. The story had everything. Undercover heroism, systematic abuse, dramatic arrest. Teresa declined all interview requests. But that didn't stop the coverage. The New York Times ran a feature, The Invisible Woman. How one agent's patience brought down New York's most dangerous crime family. Cable news panels debated the ethics of long-term undercover work. Was it too dangerous? Too psychologically damaging? Teresa stopped watching the news. Carlo's lawyers tried to fight back, of course. Martin Krebs, Carlo's defense attorney, expensive, experienced, ruthless, filed motion after motion trying to suppress evidence. Entrapment, he claimed in court filings. Agent Warren deliberately inserted herself into my client's life, encouraged him to speak freely, created a false sense of security. None of this evidence should be admissible. The judge denied every motion. Krebs tried a different angle. My client was speaking in a private restaurant, in a foreign language, with a reasonable expectation of privacy. The recordings violate his Fourth Amendment rights. Denied again. No expectation of privacy in a public restaurant. Agent Warren's testimony is biased. She has a personal vendetta against my client based on 2 years of perceived slights. Margaret Chen shut that down in her response brief. Agent Warren endured systematic abuse as part of her undercover assignment. Her professionalism in the face of Mr. Dante's cruelty is a testament to her dedication, not evidence of bias. And Mr. Dante's slights included confessing to 12 murders, which the defense conveniently fails to mention. Every legal challenge failed. The evidence was too solid. The case too airtight. Carlo's empire crumbled faster than anyone had anticipated. Within a week of his arrest, 18 associates were in custody across New York, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania. The warrants had been prepared for months. The FBI had just been waiting for Teresa's signal to execute them all simultaneously. Corrupt officials started falling like dominoes. Judge Castellano, who'd been on Carlo's payroll for 6 years, resigned and was immediately indicted. 2 NYPD officers who'd been feeding Carlo information were arrested. A city councilman who'd accepted bribes was caught trying to flee to Mexico. Diane's financial records revealed connections to 7 other criminal organizations: Russian mob, Chinese triads, Colombian cartels. She hadn't just been laundering money for Carlo. She'd been running a full-service criminal banking operation. The Financial Crimes Unit was having a field day. "This is bigger than we thought," Walsh told Teresa during one of their briefings. Diane Rossetti was the hub of an international money laundering network. "We're coordinating with Interpol, the SEC, banking regulators in 12 countries. This case is going to reshape how we prosecute organized crime." Teresa should have felt satisfaction, victory, justice. Instead, she felt tired. 6 weeks after the arrest, Teresa stood in the prosecutor's office, reviewing trial preparation materials. Margaret Chen spread photographs across the table. Crime scene photos from the Brooklyn warehouse, surveillance images of Carlo at Bellissimo, financial records with Diane's handwriting. "The trial starts in 3 months, Chin said. "You'll be our star witness. The jury needs to hear your story, not just the evidence you collected, but what you endured. The systematic abuse. The way Carlo Dante believed himself untouchable." Teresa studied the photographs. There was one of her in her waitress uniform, taken by FBI surveillance. She looked small in it, invisible. "They're going to try to rattle you on cross-examination," Chin continued. "Krebs will suggest you fabricated evidence, that you manipulated Carlo, that you're lying about the abuse to gain sympathy." "Let him try." Teresa's voice was steady. "I have 2 years of recordings. I have documents. I have witnesses. And I have the truth." Chen smiled. "That's what I wanted to hear." That night, Teresa stood in her Chelsea apartment. Her real apartment, the one she hadn't seen in 2 years. Everything was exactly as she'd left it. Her books on the shelves. Her photos on the walls. Her life frozen in time. She poured herself a glass of wine. Good wine, expensive wine, the kind Carlo would have ordered, and stood at her window looking out over the city. Somewhere out there, Carlo Dante sat in a federal holding cell, his empire in ruins, his freedom gone forever. Somewhere out there, Diane Rossetti was realizing that her financial genius wouldn't save her from a prison sentence. Somewhere out there, families of victims were learning that justice, delayed but not denied, was finally coming. Teresa raised her glass to her reflection in the window. "This is where we finish it," she said quietly. The trial would be the final chapter. The moment when every insult Carlo had thrown at her, every degrading comment, every casual confession of murder, would be presented to a jury of his peers. And Teresa would be there to watch him fall. Not as Teresa Warrants, the invisible waitress, but as Special Agent Teresa Warren, the woman who'd refused to be broken. The woman who'd seen everything. United States versus Carlo Dante began 3 months after his arrest. The federal courthouse in Manhattan was a circus. Media trucks lined every available curb. Satellite dishes pointed skyward like flowers seeking sun. Protesters gathered on the courthouse steps, some demanding justice for Carlo's victims, others bizarrely proclaiming his innocence. Federal marshals formed a perimeter, their faces stern, weapons visible. Inside courtroom 6A, the atmosphere was electric with tension. Carlo sat at the defense table in an orange jumpsuit, shackled at the wrists and ankles. The transformation was startling. Gone was the man in Armani suits with a Patek Philippe watch. This Carlo looked diminished, his tan faded from 3 months without sunlight. His confident posture replaced by the hunched shoulders of someone who knew the walls were closing in. Diane sat at a separate defense table 15 feet away, her designer wardrobe replaced by county-issued clothing. No diamonds at her throat. No manicured nails. Her perfect hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail. She looked like what she was, a criminal facing life in prison. The jury, 7 women, 5 men, carefully selected over 2 weeks of voir dire, sat in their box, faces neutral but eyes alert. Federal Judge Margaret Santos presided, her expression grave. She'd read the evidence. She knew exactly what kind of monsters sat in her courtroom. Teresa took the stand on day 3 of the trial. She wore a navy suit, her hair styled professionally, her FBI badge visible on her belt. She looked nothing like the waitress who'd served water at table 7. But as she settled into the witness chair, she felt the ghost of Teresa Warrants hovering just beneath her skin. Margaret Chen approached, her heels clicking against the marble floor. "Please state your name and occupation for the record." Special Agent Teresa Marie Warren, FBI Organized Crime Division. "Agent Warren, can you tell the jury about an operation code named Invisible Woman?" Teresa took a breath. Then she began. She recounted her recruitment, her transformation into Teresa Warrants, her 2 years working at Bellissimo. She described Carlo's routine, every Tuesday and Friday, table 7, conducting business in Italian because he believed himself safe. He assumed no one could understand him, Teresa said. He was wrong. Chin pulled up a photograph on the courtroom monitors. Teresa in her waitress uniform, serving water at table 7. Carlo laughing with his associates. What was happening in this photograph, Agent Warren? Teresa's voice was steady. Mr. Dante was discussing a drug shipment. 10,000 pills arriving at Newark Port. He was also making jokes about my appearance, calling me stupid in Italian, assuming I couldn't understand. But you could understand. Every word. Chen guided her through months of evidence. Each interaction, each recording, each piece of intelligence Teresa had gathered. Agent Warren, could you tell the court what Mr. Dante said on October 15, 2024? Teresa didn't need notes. The date was burned into her memory. He was discussing the execution of Michael Toretti. He said in Italian, Il problema di Brooklyn è risolto. Il corpo non emergerà mai dal porto. The Brooklyn problem is solved. The body will never surface from the harbor. And did you record this statement? Yes. Chen nodded to the courtroom technician. The audio file played through the speakers. Crystal clear, devastating. Carlo's voice filled the courtroom, arrogant and casual. I pesci del porto di Brooklyn mangiano bene. The Brooklyn harbor fish eat well. Laughter in the background. Diane's voice. Sempre così poetico, amore mio. Always so poetic, my love. More laughter. The jury's faces hardened. One woman in the back row had tears in her eyes. A man in the front row was clenching his jaw so tightly a muscle jumped in his cheek. Teresa watched Carlo. He sat frozen, staring at the table in front of him, as his own voice condemned him. Chen played recording after recording. Carlo discussing bribes to judges. Carlo ordering executions. Carlo laughing about disposing of bodies. 2 years of confessions, all captured because he believed the waitress was too stupid to understand. Agent Warren, during these 2 years, how did Mr. Dante treat you? Teresa's voice remained calm. Professional. He called me stupid. Worthless. A peasant. He made jokes about my appearance, my presumed poverty, my intelligence. He treated me like I was furniture. Invisible. And how did that make you feel? Martin Krebs shot to his feet. Objection. Relevance. Goes to the defendant's state of mind, Your Honor, Chin countered. His belief that certain people were beneath his notice. Overruled. The witness may answer. Teresa looked directly at the jury. It was difficult, but every insult gave me strength, because I knew that every cruel word, every dismissive gesture, was proof of his arrogance, the arrogance that would ultimately destroy him. On day 5, Chen presented the financial evidence. Spreadsheets appeared on the monitors. Diane's careful accounting of 12 murders. Payment to hit men. Cleanup costs. Disposal fees. All documented with the precision of a corporate CFO. This is evidence seized from Ms. Rossetti's portfolio, Chen explained. You'll notice the names. Toretti, Bellini, Martinez. These are murder victims. And next to each name, a dollar amount. The jury stared at the screens, horror written across their faces. Diane's separate trial was happening simultaneously in another courtroom. Witnesses were testifying to her direct involvement, not just laundering money after the fact, but actively ordering executions, arranging payments, orchestrating the financial infrastructure of murder. Back in Carlo's trial, Chen presented photographs of the Brooklyn warehouse. The blood stains. The floor drain. The DNA evidence that proved Michael Toretti had died there. Agent Warren personally investigated this location, Chen said, nearly at the cost of her own life. Can you tell the jury what you found? Teresa described the warehouse, the evidence, the close call with Carlo's enforcers. She showed the jury photographs she'd taken. The concrete floor, the drain, the chemical residue. Michael Toretti's blood was found at this location. His DNA. Evidence of his murder. And Mr. Dante's own voice on recording, bragging about it. On day 7, Martin Krebs began his cross-examination. He was good. Expensive lawyers usually were. He approached Teresa with a practiced smile that didn't reach his eyes. Agent Warren, isn't it true that you developed a personal vendetta against my client? That over 2 years of perceived slights, you allowed your emotions to compromise your objectivity? Teresa met his eyes calmly. I allowed your client to believe I was worthless and stupid. That wasn't emotion. That was strategy. Strategy. Krebs's voice dripped with skepticism. Or entrapment. You deliberately created a false persona, inserted yourself into my client's life. Your client frequented a public restaurant and discussed criminal activities in what he believed was a secure environment. I simply understood the language he was speaking. You manipulated him. I served water and cleared plates. Your client manipulated himself by believing no one was paying attention. Krebs tried different angles. Suggested the recordings were doctored. Implied Teresa had fabricated evidence. Claimed the FBI had violated Carlo's rights. Teresa deflected every attack with calm precision. She had the truth on her side. She had evidence. She had 2 years of Carlo's own words condemning him. Finally, Krebs played his last card. Agent Warren, you expect this jury to believe that you endured 2 years of abuse, 2 years of systematic degradation without developing any personal animosity toward my client? Teresa was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I developed animosity toward what your client represents. A man who believes power means he can destroy lives without consequence. A man who treats other human beings as worthless because they lack his wealth, his connections, his criminality. She turned to face the jury directly. But my feelings are irrelevant. The evidence speaks for itself. Your client's own voice, discussing murders. Financial records documenting 12 executions. Witness testimony from his own associates who've turned state's evidence. DNA proof that he murdered Michael Toretti. None of that has anything to do with how I felt. It has everything to do with what your client did. Krebs had no response to that. On day 10, Chen gave Teresa the floor for her final statement. Agent Warren, why did you endure 2 years of humiliation for this case? Teresa looked at the jury. 12 ordinary people who would decide Carlo Dante's fate. Because the people Carlo Dante murdered couldn't fight back. Michael Toretti, who tried to do the right thing and ended up feeding fish in Brooklyn Harbor. Marco Bellini, whose only crime was having a conscience. Rosa Martinez, who witnessed a conversation and paid for it with her life. Her voice grew stronger. Their families deserved justice. The communities Carlo terrorized deserved safety. And someone had to be willing to become invisible, to endure the abuse, to gather the evidence that would finally stop him. She paused, and he made it easy by never seeing me at all. His arrogance was his downfall. He believed certain people who served him water, who cleared his plates, were too inferior to matter. Too stupid to understand, too worthless to pay attention to. Teresa's eyes found Carlo across the courtroom. He was staring at her now, really seeing her for perhaps the first time. He was wrong. And now he'll spend the rest of his life paying for that mistake. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned, their faces were somber. The forewoman stood, a manila envelope in her hands. In the case of United States versus Carlo Dante, on the charge of racketeering, how do you find? Guilty. On the charge of conspiracy to commit murder in the death of Michael Toretti? Guilty. On the charge of money laundering? Guilty. 47 counts. 47 times, the forewoman said, guilty. Carlos sat motionless as his world ended. Diane, in her separate courtroom, received a similar verdict on all 32 counts against her. Teresa sat in the gallery, surrounded by FBI agents and prosecutors, and watched justice, delayed but not denied, finally arrive. As marshals led Carlo away in chains, he looked back one last time at Teresa. She didn't smile, didn't gloat, just watched as the monster who'd tormented her for 2 years disappeared through the courtroom doors. Invisible at last. The sentencing hearing was standing room only. Every seat in courtroom 6A was occupied. Victims' families in the front rows, FBI agents lining the back wall, journalists squeezed shoulder to shoulder in the gallery. The air hummed with anticipation. Carlo Dante stood before the bench, shackled at the wrists and ankles, flanked by 2 federal marshals. He looked smaller than he had during the trial, diminished not just physically but spiritually, as though the guilty verdict had extracted something fundamental from him. Federal Judge Margaret Santos sat elevated above the courtroom, the case file open before her. She'd spent 3 days reviewing sentencing guidelines, victim impact statements, the full scope of Carlo's crimes. Her expression was grave. "Mr. Dante," she began, her voice carrying through the silent courtroom, "in my 30 years on the bench, I have presided over hundreds of criminal cases. Drug dealers, murderers, organized crime figures. But I have never seen such calculated cruelty, such systematic destruction of human life." Carlo stared at the floor, his jaw clenched. "You corrupted institutions meant to protect the public. You murdered witnesses who dared to speak truth. You terrorized entire communities, making them complicit in their own oppression through fear. You built an empire on suffering, and you did it with such arrogance that you believed yourself untouchable." Judge Santos paused, letting the weight of her words settle. "But perhaps your greatest mistake was believing that power came from money and violence." She looked directly at him, her gaze unflinching. "Agent Warren taught us all a different lesson. That true power comes from truth, from patience, from seeing what others miss. She saw you, Mr. Dante. Every crime, every confession, every moment of cruelty, and she had the courage and discipline to remain invisible until the moment justice could be served." She picked up the sentencing document. "Carlo Vincent Dante, you are hereby sentenced to life in federal prison without possibility of parole. You will serve your sentence at ADX Florence in Colorado, where you will remain for the rest of your natural life." The gavel came down with finality. Life. No parole. No appeals that would change the outcome. Carlo Dante would die in prison. In the adjacent courtroom, Diane Rossetti received 25 years for her role as the financial architect of murder. Her face remained impassive as the sentence was read, but her hands trembled in her lap. 18 of Carlo's associates received sentences ranging from 8 to 30 years. Sal, who'd been shot during the arrest, got 15 years. Polly got 12. The man with the scar got 28. The Dante crime family was finished. As marshals prepared to escort Carlo from the courtroom, he turned. His eyes scanned the gallery until they found Teresa, sitting in the third row between Walsh and Rodriguez. For a long moment, their gazes locked. His eyes held something Teresa had never seen before: respect. Grudging, bitter, resentful, but respect nonetheless. The acknowledgement that she had beaten him, that the invisible woman had destroyed everything he'd built. Teresa didn't smile, didn't gloat. She simply watched as the marshals led him away, his shackles clinking with each step. The man who'd called her stupid, worthless, a peasant, reduced to a prisoner in an orange jumpsuit, walking toward a life in a concrete cage. His empire reduced to ashes. The aftermath moved swiftly. The federal government seized $240 million in assets. Mansions, cars, offshore accounts, shell corporations. Everything Carlo and Diane had built through decades of crime. 43 additional arrests followed in the weeks after sentencing. corrupt officials who'd been on Carlo's payroll, judges who'd taken bribes, police officers who'd fed him information, a city councilman, 2 state senators, a deputy commissioner. The corruption ran deeper than anyone had imagined, and Teresa's evidence had exposed it all. Families of Carlo's victims finally received closure. Michael Toretti's mother attended the sentencing, weeping as Carlo was led away. Marco Bellini's widow gave a victim impact statement that left the courtroom in tears. Rosa Martinez's children, now adults, stood together as justice was finally served for the mother who'd been stolen from them. Teresa met with each family privately, apologized that it had taken so long, promised them that their loved ones had not been forgotten. 6 weeks after sentencing, Teresa stood on the stage at FBI headquarters in Washington, D.C. Director Christopher Hayes presented her with the FBI's Medal of Valor, the Bureau's highest honor, reserved for agents who demonstrate exceptional courage in the line of duty. Special Agent Teresa Warren exemplifies everything we aspire to as federal law enforcement officers, Hayes said, his voice booming through the auditorium. For 2 years, she lived a double life, enduring systematic abuse and humiliation, never breaking cover, never compromising the investigation. Her dedication resulted in the dismantling of one of New York's most dangerous crime families and the exposure of corruption at the highest levels. He pinned the medal to Teresa's uniform. The auditorium erupted in applause. Hundreds of FBI agents, standing, honoring one of their own. Teresa's story became legendary within the Bureau. Recruits at Quantico now studied her case in undercover operations courses. Her techniques, her patience, her ability to remain invisible. All of it was analyzed, documented, held up as the gold standard. But Teresa herself struggled to adjust. Normal life felt impossible after 2 years of being someone else. She returned to her desk at the Organized Crime Division, but the routine felt foreign. Coffee at her desk, paperwork, team meetings, everything so ordinary after living on the edge for so long. Dr. Reeves continued their sessions. "You're experiencing what many long-term undercover agents face," she explained. "Your identity was fractured. Teresa Warren and Teresa Warrants became 2 separate people. Now you have to integrate them again. How long does that take?" "As long as it takes." Teresa reconnected with friends she'd abandoned for 2 years. Went to dinner with her sister. Visited her mother. Tried to remember what it felt like to be normal. But some nights she'd wake up in a cold sweat, hearing Carlo's voice. "Guarda questa serva patetica." Those nights she'd remind herself. He was in ADX Florence, in solitary confinement, serving life without parole. He couldn't hurt anyone anymore. 3 months after the sentencing, the FBI held a press conference. Teresa sat at a table alongside Walsh and Director Hayes, cameras flashing, reporters shouting questions. One journalist asked the question Teresa had been expecting. "Agent Warren, how did you endure 2 years of constant humiliation?" Teresa looked directly into the cameras. Thought about every insult, every cruel joke, every moment Carlo had treated her like garbage. "Every insult he threw at me became evidence," she said clearly. "Every time he called me worthless, He handed me another nail for his coffin. He thought speaking Italian made him powerful, that it protected him, made him untouchable. She paused, making sure every word landed. But language isn't power. Truth is. And I understood every single word. The quote made headlines everywhere. Truth is power. FBI agent who brought down Mafia Boss speaks out. 6 months after the trial, Teresa walked into her office at the FBI field office in Lower Manhattan. A new assignment sat on her desk, another organized crime case, another monster who believed himself untouchable. She picked up the file, studying the suspect's photograph. Already her mind was working, analyzing, planning. But her eyes drifted to the wall beside her desk. Framed there, preserved behind glass, was her old waitress uniform from Bellissimo. The simple black dress, the white apron, the small decorative pin that had captured everything. Below it, a brass plaque read, "The Invisible Woman Who Saw Everything." Teresa touched the glass gently, remembering. The humiliation, the fear, the triumph. She'd been invisible for 2 years, had endured abuse that would have broken most people, had maintained perfect cover while gathering evidence that dismantled an empire. And she'd do it again if she had to, because that's what justice required sometimes. The willingness to become nothing so that truth could become everything. Her phone buzzed. Walsh. New case briefing in 20 minutes. Conference room B. Teresa grabbed the file folder, her FBI badge clipped to her belt where it belonged, and headed for the door. She was Special Agent Teresa Warren, the woman who'd brought down Carlo Dante. The woman who'd proven that the quiet ones, the invisible ones, the ones dismissed as worthless, they were often the most dangerous of all, because they were listening, always listening, and they understood every single word. Somewhere in Colorado, in the Supermax prison known as ADX Florence, Carlo Dante sat in his concrete cell, 7 by 12 feet, no windows, 23 hours a day in solitary confinement. He had decades ahead of him. Decades of this cage, this silence, this nothingness. And every day, he thought about the waitress who'd destroyed him, the woman he'd never bothered to see. Never underestimate the quiet ones. They might not speak much, might fade into the background, might seem invisible, insignificant, beneath your notice. But they're watching, listening, seeing everything you think is hidden. And one day, when you least expect it, they'll show you exactly how much power invisibility can hold. The monsters who believe themselves untouchable can be brought down by those they underestimate. Teresa Warren proved that. And her story, the story of the invisible woman who saw everything, will echo through the halls of justice for generations to come. Thanks for watching till the very end. If this story moved you, hit like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. I'll be dropping another unforgettable story tomorrow, so make sure you don't miss it.